$2 million, one dead engine, and a woman who thought she couldn't lose. Elaine Voss stood on the deck of a 140-foot yacht that hadn't started in 6 months and laughed in a mechanic's face. What she didn't know was that the man she was mocking had built the engine with his own hands 10 years ago, and the failsafe he'd hidden inside it was about to end her father's oldest secret. Stay with me to the end, because what happens inside that engine room is going to change how you see people in oil-stained jackets. If this story hits you, hit like, and tell me where you're watching from tonight. The marina smelled like salt and money. Mason Reyes had worked the docks at Belhaven Harbor for 6 years, and in all that time he'd never once been invited past the velvet rope that separated the working boats from the mega yachts. Tonight the rope was down, and a red carpet ran from the parking lot to the gangway of the biggest boat in the harbor, a 140-foot vessel called the Meridian Star, all white hull and dark glass, sitting dead in the water like a beautiful corpse. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd come to fix a bilge pump on slip 14, 2 boats down, and the noise had pulled him over before he even knew what he was walking into. Waiters in black vests carried trays of champagne across the dock. A string quartet played something classical that didn't belong anywhere near diesel fumes. Photographers lined the edge of the crowd, their cameras aimed at the yacht like it was a movie star. Mason's hands were still black with grease from the bilge job. His jacket, the same canvas work jacket he wore every day, stained at the cuffs. A tear at the shoulder he kept meaning to stitch, stood out among $300,000 of evening wear like a bruise on clean skin. "Sir, this is a private event." The woman who said it wore a headset and a smile that had been trained, not felt. Mason held up his hands, grease and all. "Just passing through." "Didn't mean to." Mr. Reyes, the voice cut through the quartet like a blade. Mason turned. Elaine Voss stood at the top of the gangway in a black dress that probably cost more than his truck. Her dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. A glass of champagne in one hand she wasn't drinking. She was younger than he expected for someone who'd just inherited a shipping empire. Maybe 34, 35, but her eyes had the flat. A praising quality of someone who'd spent a decade learning not to trust anyone in a room. "You know my name?" Mason asked. "I know everyone who works this marina." She came down the gangway, heels clicking against teak. "You fixed Harbor Master's radio last spring. Fast cheap. That's rare down here. Just doing my job." "Then do it now." She gestured to the yacht behind her, and for the first time Mason noticed the tension underneath her polish, a tightness around her mouth that the photographers weren't close enough to catch. "This boat hasn't run in 6 months. 3 marine engineering firms have looked at her. All 3 walked away. I have a board meeting in 72 hours where certain people are going to vote on whether my father's company gets sold off in pieces, and this yacht, his yacht, is supposed to be the centerpiece of tomorrow's press event that convinces them not to." She took a breath. "I need her running by morning." A ripple went through the crowd. Someone laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. Mason glanced over and saw a man in a tailored suit shaking his head at his companion, not bothering to lower his voice. "She's asking the dock guy. This is what desperation looks like." Elaine's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away from Mason. $2 million if you get her running by 6 a.m. Cash? Tonight the crowd went quiet enough that Mason could hear the water lapping against the hull. "That's a joke," someone said. "It's not," Elaine said, still watching Mason. "Well?" Mason looked past her, at the yacht rising out of the black water, and felt something shift in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Recognition, sharp and sudden, like running into an old friend's face in a stranger's crowd. He didn't tell her yet that he knew this boat. He didn't tell her that 10 years ago, before everything fell apart, he'd spent 14 months in a shipyard in Norfolk, building the custom propulsion system that sat dead in her hull right now. He didn't tell her that the man who'd signed off on the final specs, The man whose name was on every patent, every certificate, every piece of paperwork that made this yacht one of the most sophisticated vessels ever built for private use, had never once put Mason's name on anything, even though Mason had designed the fail-safe system that made the whole engine possible. He didn't say any of that. He just nodded. "I'll take a look." Laughter rippled through the crowd again, louder this time. A woman in emerald green covered her mouth like she was trying to be polite about it, and failing. "Should we call an actual engineer, Elaine, or is this a stunt?" "Get your toolbox, sweetheart," a man near the gangway said, and the way he said sweetheart made Mason's shoulders go tight. "Try not to break anything else." Mason didn't answer. He walked back to his truck, a 15-year-old Ford with a dented tailgate, parked between two Bentleys like a mistake someone had made, and pulled his toolbox out of the bed. It was battered aluminum, dented on every corner, stickers half peeled from the lid. Someone in the crowd took a photograph of it. He heard the shutter click and pretended not to. His daughter's face flashed through his mind as he carried the box back toward the gangway. Nora, 7 years old, asleep right now at Mrs. Alvarez's place 2 streets over, unaware that her father was about to either save the night or make a fool of himself in front of 300 people with champagne glasses. Nora, who needed a surgery in 4 months that his insurance wouldn't fully cover, no matter how many extra bilge pumps he fixed on the side. $2 million wasn't a number he let himself think about. It was too large to be real. But Nora's surgery, that number he thought about every single day. He stepped onto the gangway. Elaine watched him come, something unreadable behind her eyes. "You have 3 hours before my head of security asks you to leave," she said quietly. "Just for him. I'd use them." 3 hours is plenty," Mason said, and something in his voice made her actually look at him. Really look. The way you look at someone when a detail doesn't match the picture you'd already drawn. "You sound confident for a dock mechanic." "I've seen worse engines," Mason said, and walked past her toward the stairs that led down into the belly of the ship. What Elaine didn't know, what nobody on that dock knew, laughing into their champagne, was that Mason Reyes had once carried a security clearance that would have made half of them nervous. That before Belhaven Harbor, before the divorce that took almost everything, before the string of bad luck that turned a decorated marine propulsion engineer into a man who fixed rich people's radios for grocery money, Mason had been one of 6 engineers in the country cleared to work on hybrid diesel-electric drive systems for luxury and military-adjacent vessels. That the yacht sitting dead in the water above him wasn't just any yacht. It was the last project he'd worked before his life came apart. It was, in a very real sense, his. He just hadn't told anyone that in 10 years. And he wasn't going to start now, not with cameras 3 hours from documenting everything. The engine room was cold and smelled like stale diesel and dust. Mason clicked on his flashlight and let the beam travel over twin 12-cylinder engines, each one the size of a small car, connected to a hybrid electric drive system with more wiring than most houses. Even dead, even silent, the thing was beautiful. He remembered every inch of it. He remembered arguing with the shipyard's lead engineer, a brilliant, arrogant man named Arthur Voss, about the fail-safe relay he wanted to install in case of catastrophic electrical failure. Arthur had said it was unnecessary. Mason had installed it anyway, quietly, in a panel most people would never think to open, because that was the kind of engineer Mason had always been. The kind who built for the disaster nobody wanted to imagine. He found the panel exactly where he'd left it, behind a bulkhead most technicians wouldn't even know existed. His hands remembered the sequence before his mind caught up. 3 bolts, a quarter turn each, a service plate that hadn't been touched in a decade. Behind it, a stamped metal plate, half hidden by grime. R7. Murnyer, his own initials. Pressed into steel a decade ago by a younger version of himself who still believed the world rewarded good work. He stood there for a long moment, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand, feeling 10 years collapse into this one dim, oil-smelling room. Above him, footsteps, the gala continued, muffled through the deck. Somewhere up there, Elaine Voss was probably regretting the offer already, probably calculating how she'd explain to the board tomorrow that she'd bet $2 million on a dock mechanic and lost. Mason opened his toolbox and got to work. The first hour, he did what any competent mechanic would do. Check the batteries, the starter relays, the basic circuits any of the three engineering firms would have already checked. He found what he expected to find, nothing obviously wrong. That was the trick of this system. The failure wasn't in any single component. It was in the relationship between three systems that had been designed deliberately by him to fail safely rather than catastrophically, which meant that when something upstream went wrong, the whole engine simply refused to run rather than risk damage. Elegant. Also, apparently, completely mystifying to three separate engineering firms who didn't know the system had been built that way on purpose. Above deck, the gala moved through its evening. Mason heard laughter drift down through the open hatch, the clink of glasses, a toast being raised to something. He kept working. 2 hours in, he found it, a corroded ground connection in a junction box that any of the three firms would have needed his exact schematics to locate, because it wasn't marked on any diagram that existed outside his own memory. He designed it that way for security reasons, at Arthur Voss's own insistence, a full decade ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. Arthur's paranoia about industrial espionage had built the very obscurity that was now stranding his daughter's yacht in the water. Mason cleaned the connection, tested the relay, and felt the whole engine room hum faintly as auxiliary power came alive for the first time in 6 months. He checked his watch. 40 minutes left. He climbed the stairs to the main deck to find fuel levels and stepped straight into Elaine Voss, who was standing at the top of the stairwell like she'd been waiting there for a while. "Well?" she said. Her champagne glass was empty now, and something in her face had gone tighter, more brittle, since he'd gone below. "I found the problem. You found it." Her voice had an edge that hadn't been there before. "In 2 hours. After 3 firms with 40 combined years of marine engineering experience found nothing. I got lucky," Mason said, "because it was easier than the truth. Nobody gets that lucky." Elaine studied him, and for a moment Mason thought she might actually ask the question hanging behind her eyes. The obvious one. The one about how a dock mechanic knew exactly where to look on a hybrid propulsion system this sophisticated. But the string quartet chose that moment to strike up something louder, and a man in a tuxedo called her name from across the deck, and whatever suspicion had been forming in her expression got folded away behind the practiced smile she wore for cameras. "Finish it," she said, and turned to greet her guest. Mason went back below. 35 minutes left. He primed the fuel lines, cycled the starter sequence, and felt the whole hull shudder as 12 cylinders turned over for the first time in half a year. The sound was enormous, a deep mechanical roar that vibrated up through the deck plates and out across the water. Above him, he heard the gala go silent, then erupt into gasps and scattered applause, the way a crowd reacts to a magic trick they can't explain. He climbed back up onto the deck just as the engine settled into a smooth, steady idle, the sound of $200 million of marine engineering doing exactly what it was designed to do. The crowd had gone quiet. Elaine stood at the rail, staring at the water churning gently at the stern, then turned to look at Mason like she was seeing him for the first time. "You did it," she said. "Told you 3 hours was plenty." Someone in the crowd started clapping. Hesitant. Then more people joined, and within seconds the same people who'd laughed at his oil-stained jacket were applauding him like he'd performed a miracle. Mason didn't smile. He was thinking about the plate behind the bulkhead. R7. Munir. He was thinking about how close he'd come to saying nothing at all and just walking away with a duffel bag full of cash that would fix everything wrong with his life in one night. Elaine crossed the deck to him, heels clicking, and for the first time all night she looked at him without the appraising coldness from before. $2 million, she said. As promised. My assistant will have it ready within the hour. I don't want it yet, Mason said. Elaine blinked. Excuse me? There's something you should see first. He held her gaze. Below deck. Just you. Something crossed her face. Suspicion. Maybe. Or the automatic wariness of someone who'd learned the hard way that people who solve your problems too easily are often setting up bigger ones. But she nodded, once, and told the man in the tuxedo she'd be back in 5 minutes, and followed Mason down the narrow stairwell into the engine room, leaving the party and its photographers and its champagne behind them. The engine room was warm now, alive with the hum of running machinery. Mason led her to the bulkhead, to the panel he'd already reopened, and shone his flashlight on the stamped plate behind it. R7. Elaine read aloud. Myrner. She frowned. What is this? Service designation, Mason said, and initials. Mason J. Reyes. Elaine went very still. I built this engine, Mason said quietly. 10 years ago. Norfolk Shipyard. I was the lead propulsion engineer on this build for 14 months before your father's chief engineer, Arthur Voss, took full credit for the design and had my name stripped from every patent filing, every certificate, every piece of paperwork that mattered. I got a severance check and a non-disclosure agreement instead of a career. I got nothing else. He nodded at the plate. Except this. I stamped my initials somewhere Arthur never thought to look, because some part of me knew he was never going to give me credit for the work. I just didn't expect to ever have to prove it. Elaine's face had drained of color in the dim light. Arthur Voss. My father's engineering director for 30 years. Your father's engineering director, Mason, agreed, who told the shipyard that the fail-safe relay in this exact system was his own idea, patented it under his name, and used that patent, among 4 others he'd taken the same way, to justify the 7-figure bonus your father's board approved for him the year this yacht was delivered. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's a stamped plate and a decade-old shipyard logbook with my handwriting in it, which I still have, because I never trusted him enough to throw anything away. Mason's voice was steady, not angry, just tired, the way a man sounds when he's carried something heavy for a very long time and finally sets it down. I didn't come here tonight looking for this. I came to fix a bilge pump 2 boats over. But I'm not going to stand in this engine room and pretend I don't recognize my own work. And I'm not going to take $2 million from you without telling you exactly what and who you're actually paying for. Elaine stared at the plate for a long moment, then at Mason, something working behind her eyes that looked almost like grief. My father's engineering director is retiring in 3 months, she said quietly. The board wanted to give him a farewell tribute at tomorrow's event. Right here, on this boat. She laughed, short and humorless. I was going to stand next to him and thank him publicly for building the flagship of my father's legacy. I'm sorry, Mason said, and meant it. Don't be. Elaine's jaw tightened, the softness from a moment ago hardening back into something sharper. I've spent 6 years running a company my father left me, surrounded by men who've spent 30 years learning exactly how to take credit for things they didn't build. I should have known Arthur was one of them. I think some part of me did know, and didn't want to look too closely, because looking too closely at anything in this company right now feels like it might bring the whole thing down. She looked at Mason. Why are you telling me this? You could have taken the money and said nothing. I'd never have known. Because I have a daughter, Mason said. She's 7. She needs surgery in 4 months that my insurance doesn't fully cover, and $2 million would fix that overnight, and God knows I thought about just taking it and walking away. He held Elaine's gaze. But I want her to grow up believing her father is somebody who tells the truth even when the lie would be easier and more profitable. I've had 10 years of watching a man take credit for my work while I fixed radios for grocery money. I'm not interested in one more night of silence, even a well-paid one. Elaine was quiet for a long moment, the engine humming steady beneath them. Then she said, "Show me the logbook." Mason opened his toolbox and lifted out a battered notebook wrapped in a plastic bag, pages soft with age, filled with a decade of handwritten calculations, schematics, and dated entries, a paper trail that predated every patent Arthur Voss had ever filed on this system. Elaine flipped through it slowly, her expression shifting page by page from disbelief to something colder and more focused. The look, Mason thought, of a CEO doing math in her head, running numbers on exactly how much this was going to cost the company, and exactly how much it was going to cost Arthur Voss. "The board meeting is in 72 hours, she said finally, closing the notebook. "I was going to walk in there with this yacht running and a united front to stop them from breaking up my father's company. Now I'm going to walk in there with proof that my most trusted engineering director built his entire reputation on stolen work, and I have absolutely no idea whether that helps me or destroys everything." She looked up at Mason. "What do you want out of this? Money? A settlement? A lawsuit?" "I want my name on the patents that are actually mine," Mason said. "And I want Arthur Voss to answer for it publicly, in front of the same board that gave him 7-figure bonuses for work he stole. That's all. Not revenge. Just the truth, finally, in daylight, where it should have been 10 years ago." Elaine studied him for a long moment, and something in her face, cold since the moment he'd met her, cracked open into something more human. "You could have taken the $2 million and disappeared," she said again, quieter this time. "Most people would have. Most people haven't spent 10 years watching what silence does to a person," Mason said. "I'm done being quiet." Elaine nodded slowly, and for the first time all night, extended her hand. Mason shook it. Her grip was firm, deliberate, the handshake of someone rebuilding a decision in real time. "Come to the board meeting," she said. "Bring the logbook. Bring anything else you have. I'll have my legal team meet with you tomorrow morning to start building the case properly." She paused. "And Mr. Reyes, the $2 million still stands, not as hush money, as what you're actually owed for a decade of unpaid, uncredited work, plus every year of interest my company should be ashamed it let accrue." 3 days later, the boardroom at Voss Maritime Holdings was colder than the engine room had ever been. 12 board members sat around a table of dark polished wood, Arthur Voss among them, silver-haired and composed in a navy suit, a farewell plaque already prepared on an easel near the window for the tribute nobody now expected to happen. Elaine stood at the head of the table, Mason seated to her right with his notebook open in front of him, still wearing the same canvas jacket, cuffs still faintly stained, because he hadn't wanted to show up in a suit he didn't own the truth in. "Before we discuss the proposed restructuring," Elaine said, her voice carrying the same flat authority Mason had first heard on the marina dock, "there's a matter of intellectual property I need this board to address." She nodded to Mason. "This is Mason Reyes. 10 years ago, he was the lead propulsion engineer on the Meridian Star build. He designed the hybrid failsafe system that 4 of Arthur's patents are built on. Arthur's expression didn't change, not immediately, 30 years of boardroom composure holding steady even as his eyes flicked toward Mason with something sharp and calculating behind them. "I don't know this man," he said smoothly. "If he worked on the shipyard crew, I certainly don't remember every technician who." "He wasn't a technician," Elaine said. "He was the lead engineer. And he has a decade of dated logbooks, a stamped service plate hidden inside the vessel's hull that predates your patent filings by 14 months, and shipyard payroll records showing his clearance level was equal to yours on this specific project." She placed a folder on the table. "My legal team has reviewed everything. It's not ambiguous." The room had gone very still. One board member, an older woman near the far end of the table, leaned forward slightly. "Arthur, is this true? This is absurd." Arthur's voice rose slightly, the first crack in 30 years of polish. "I built that failsafe system myself. I have the original design documents. Design documents you filed 14 months after the plate in that engine was stamped, Elaine said. Documents that, according to the shipyard's own records, were submitted 3 weeks after Mr. Reyes's severance and non-disclosure agreement was signed, the same week he was let go, conveniently unable to speak on the matter without violating a contract you personally drafted. Arthur's jaw tightened. That ENDA was standard practice. For an engineer you're now claiming didn't design anything worth protecting? Elaine's voice was cold and clear. You can't have it both ways, Arthur. Either his work mattered enough to require a legal silence agreement, or it didn't matter at all and you have nothing to explain. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Mason watched Arthur's face, the same practiced calm he must have worn for 30 years, cracking now at the edges like ice under pressure. I built this company's engineering reputation, Arthur said, quieter now, almost pleading. Whatever this man contributed, I refined it, I certified it. I put my name and my career behind it in front of clients, regulators, the board. You put your name behind work you didn't do, Mason said, speaking for the first time since he'd sat down. His voice was steady, not loud, the same quiet register he'd used on the marina dock 3 nights ago. I don't need this board to punish you out of anger. I just need them to know the truth. And I need my name on the patents I actually earned. And I need the last decade of royalties this company owes me for using my design without my knowledge or consent. The board member who'd spoken earlier looked around the table slowly. I move we suspend Mr. Voss's retirement benefits pending a full independent audit of every patent filed under his name during his tenure, she said, and that we open formal negotiations with Mr. Reyes regarding compensation and proper attribution. The motion carried 11-1. Arthur Voss left the boardroom without another word, his farewell plaque still sitting on its easel by the window, a tribute now permanently unspoken. Mason watched him go and felt no satisfaction in it, just a quiet, exhausted relief. The particular stillness that comes after setting down a weight you'd carried so long you'd forgotten what walking without it felt like. 6 weeks later, Mason stood on the same marina dock where it had all started, except this time there was no gala, no photographers, no champagne. Just the ordinary hum of an ordinary morning, gulls circling overhead, boats rocking gently against their slips. Nora sat on the edge of the dock beside him, swinging her legs, freshly recovered from a surgery that $2 million and a proper patent settlement had made possible without a single sleepless night over hospital bills. "Daddy," she said, watching a small sailboat glide past, "is this the marina where the lady gave you all that money?" "That's the one. Was she still mean afterward?" Mason thought about Elaine Voss, about the advisory role she'd offered him at Voss Maritime 3 weeks ago, an offer he was still turning over slowly in his mind, unsure whether he belonged in that world or just adjacent to it, close enough to help without being swallowed by it. "No," he said. She learned some things about people she trusted. It changed her. "That's good," Nora said, satisfied, the way 7-year-olds are satisfied by simple moral arithmetic. People should get to change if they learn stuff. "Yeah," Mason said, watching the sailboat disappear around the breakwater, feeling something in his chest finally settle after 10 long years of carrying a truth nobody would let him tell. They should. He put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, and for a long, quiet moment, neither of them said anything else. The tide came in slow and even against the dock pilings, the way it always had, the way it always would, indifferent to boardrooms and patents and stolen credit, just water, doing what water does, patient enough to wear down anything eventually, even a decade of silence. It was enough. Not perfect. Not a fairy tale where every wrong gets undone all at once. Just a father, his daughter, a dock in the morning sun, and the quiet, hard-won knowledge that telling the truth, even when silence would have paid better, was still, in the end, the only thing worth building a life on.